Hello and welcome. You're watching Inside with me, Siddharth Talia. Our focus on this episode of Inside is, of course, the tragedy that has unfolded in Ahmedabad, causing the deaths of 265 people. It is the Air India AI-171 crash that happened shortly after 1:30 p.m. on the afternoon of the 12th of June. There was sweltering heat, there were clear skies, and a flight that took off crash landed within about 38 seconds of being airborne. 265 people died, including 241 people who were on board, and miraculously there was one survivor who managed to escape that entire ordeal. But the families, of course, of the victims completely crestfallen and shell-shocked at the circumstances in which this tragedy has unfolded. We begin today's show with a tribute to those 265 people who perished in this tragedy. It's supposedly the safest way to travel. It's not as if you're navigating horrible traffic or senseless motorists, or dangerous terrain or faulty railway tracks. And there was no turbulent weather either. Parts of northern, western and central India are in the middle of a heat wave, so the skies were clear. Families of 242 people bid farewell to them on the morning of the 12th of June. 12 of them were crew members. The others were passengers, including infants. A family of 5, husband and wife and 3 children, relocating to London. 2 sisters flying there for a vacation. Crew members from Manipur, including one who had been living in a displacement camp because of the violence that had unfolded in the state. A former Chief Minister of Gujarat wanting to visit his daughter. All of them would have entered the airport, checked in their baggage, completed their immigration formalities, headed to the waiting area before boarding the flight. It was Air India, a trusted airline, and a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a state-of-the-art modern passenger aircraft with a strong reputation for safety. The pilot of the aircraft, Captain Sumit Sabharwal, had more than 8,000 hours of flying experience. His co-pilot Clive Kundar had clocked more than 1,000 hours of flying. So what could possibly go wrong? But it did, and it did so quite horribly. AI-171 from Ahmedabad never reached Gatwick Airport. It never even left Ahmedabad. It took off and then crashed within seconds outside the perimeter of the airport, having flown only up to a little over 600 feet.
अब देखिए इसी इमारत से वो प्लेन किस तरीके से टकराते हुए यहाँ पर क्रैश हुआ है। नीचे आपको प्लेन के सभी पार्ट्स जो है आपको देखने मिल जाएंगे। यहाँ हो, सामने की तरफ हो, पीछे की तरफ हो, मतलब सब कुछ जलकर पूरी तरह राख हो चुका है। और ये जो इमारत है, जो इमारत धराशायी होने की कगार पर है, जो प्लेन से टकराई है, ये इमारत तक वो मेस था, डॉक्टर्स मेस था, हॉस्पिटल का, बीजे मेडिकल कॉलेज हॉस्पिटल का मेस था, और उसके अंदर लोग खाने के लिए पहुंचे हुए थे, डॉक्टर्स पहुंचे हुए थे। पुलिस कमिश्नर ने सीधे तौर पे ये कहा है कि प्लेन के अंदर सवार सभी यात्री जो है उनकी तो मौत हुई है, लेकिन कैजुअलिटी और भी बढ़ सकती है, क्योंकि ये एक इमारत की हालत आपने देख ली, उसके बगल वाली की हालत आपने देख ली जो पूरी तरह जलकर राख है। लेकिन पीछे की तरफ अगर आप देखेंगे तो और 4 इमारतें हैं जो पूरी तरह से ऊपर से लेकर नीचे तक वो भी जलकर राख है। यहाँ चारों तरफ आपको जो है, हर तरफ आपको सिर्फ मलबा ही नजर आएगा, प्लेन का मलबा नजर आएगा। जो प्लेन क्रैश हुआ उसका मलबा आपको ये जो है पूरी तरह नजर आएगा। ये देखिए, ये जो एक हिस्सा है, हालांकि प्लेन का ही हिस्सा नजर आ रहा है, ये यहाँ पर टूट कर गिरा है, ये तक आप देख सकते हैं।
The flight crashed near a residential area that also housed the hotels and eating messes of BJ Medical College and Hospital. There were MBBS students having lunch around that time.
घर में भी था, एकदम से आवाज़ आया, भूकंप जैसा लगा, बाहर आया तो धुआं धुआं, मालूम नहीं था मेरे प्लेन के हुआ, ऐसा मालूम नहीं था।
तो ऑफिस से बाहर निकला तो मैंने देखा कि आवाज जोर से आवाज आया विंग्स का, फिर पूरा धुआं धुआं भर गया, लोग यहाँ से भगदड़ मची। उसके बाद आके देख रहे थे ये हादसा की स्थिति।
एकदम से धमाका हुआ, कुछ पता नहीं चल रहा मुझे, सब जगह धूल मिट्टी और ऐसा लगा जैसे बॉम्ब किसी ने फेंक दिया।
मैं यहीं मेरे ऑफिस में बैठी थी, जैसा धड़ाका हुआ मैं वहाँ ऑफिस से वहाँ गई, बहुत बड़ा प्लेन क्रैश हुआ था, तो बहुत धुआं और आग लगी थी। जो डॉक्टर्स के फ्लैट थे उनको बहुत डैमेज हुए हैं और उसमें से कितने डॉक्टरों को हमने निकाला है, लोकल कार्यकर्ता और सब मिलके।
The aircraft had a full end takeoff on the 3.5 kilometer runway at the Sardar Patel International Airport. It secured an elevation of 625 feet and then began to lose height. It was in air only for around 34 seconds before it crashed. Now, what's very unusual about the crash of AI 171 is that it took place during the initial climb stage of the aircraft once it had taken off. Now, a bulk of the crashes that have taken place over the last 5 years have actually occurred in the landing stage of the aircraft. That's an approximately 36.7% that we're talking about here. A lot of the flights have also crashed during takeoff. That's about 10.2%, but almost a quarter of the aircrafts that have actually crashed over the last 5 years have actually done so in the en route stage while they're on their way to their destination. So what's really interesting about this particular crash is that it took place within seconds of taking off in the initial climb stage. Remember, it had only managed to reach an elevation of approximately 625 feet before it began to descend and of course eventually crash outside the perimeter of the Ahmedabad airport. So that's one angle that the investigating authorities in this particular case will be focusing on as to why this particular aircraft crashed in such an early stage of its journey, not even leaving Ahmedabad. It just happened outside the airport area. The investigations will take a long time to conclude. There are two parallel inquiries that are currently underway. It's very difficult for us at this juncture to ascribe any kind of a timeline to the investigations, but lots of unanswered questions still remain. Not only did 241 members aboard that plane die, but after it crashed, many who were at the BJ Medical College premises and in and around also succumbed. The total death toll as of the 13th of June stands at 265, though the numbers may rise.
हम लोग इतने डॉक्टरों का इतना कुछ किया है, आज हमारे लिए इतना करो कि बस मेरे भतीजे और मेरे मम्मी को मिला दो।
हम लोग वही मेस में ही काम करते हैं। अच्छा, खाना बनाने का हम टिफिन सर्विस का करते हैं। हम टिफिन लेके निकल गए, मम्मी लोग खाना बना रहे थे।
फोन आया था मेरी बहन को, दीदी का प्लेन क्रैश हो गया कहते। दीदी ने
सिविल में ले जाके भर्ती किया और बहू बच गई है और लड़का मेरा चला गया है, मेरा लड़का चला गया मेरे को छोड़ के।
और जैसे आग लगी और मेरे भाई के ऊपर पड़ गई, मेरा भाई वहाँ के वहाँ जल गया। मेरी मम्मी उसको बचाने गई थी, पर मेरी मम्मी को धुआं आ गया तो मेरी मम्मी दौड़ चली।
The magnitude of the impact on the ground and the ensuing explosion was such that there was almost no chance of survival for those on board and those who were directly in the line of fire, so to speak. But there was one miracle. One man seated on seat 11A survived. Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, a British national of Indian origin.
थोड़ा टाइम लेके तो मेरे को लगा था कि मैं भी मरने वाला हूँ, लेकिन जब मेरी आँख खुल के मैं देखा ना तो मुझे लगा मैं जिंदा हूँ। तो मैंने ट्राई किया, जब मेरी सीट थे वो मेरी बेल्ट निकाला, मैंने वो ट्राई किया जहाँ से निकल सकते वहाँ से, तो मैं निकल गया वहाँ से। मेरे सामने नजरों के सामने एयर होस्टल और दूसरे आंटी अंकल सभी उसमें मिस हो गए थे सभी। फिर भी मेरे पता नहीं मैं कैसे बचा हूँ, क्योंकि मेरी नज़र के सामने ही सब दो एयर होस्टल वो अंकल आंटी सब उधर ही सब।
Many others whose bodies were recovered were charred beyond recognition. The families and loved ones will have to undergo DNA testing for identification so that the remains can be returned to them.
What has happened in Ahmedabad is a very tragic accident. We have lost a lot of people. We extend our deepest condolences to all those who have lost their loved ones. There are, I understand, several foreigners also. Those updates you will receive from the relevant departments, Ministry of Civil Aviation, Air India, and others. They are putting out something, I guess, soon. That's the latest that I can share. We also, it's still an evolving situation. Rescue operations are on, so you'll have to wait a little more time for exact details to be put out.
The Minister for Civil Aviation, the Union Home Minister and Prime Minister Mr. Narendra Modi have taken stock of the situation and investigations have been ordered.
We tend to think, if suppose for the sake of our proposition, argument or hypothesis, if both the engines have failed together.
But how can that happen? That is the big question.
So that's a very big question.
Seconds after takeoff, just seconds after takeoff.
So that's a very big question. I would not hazard a guess here because there's so many conspiracy theories which will be going on the net, social media and otherwise. So I don't want to put any kind of wind into it. But I would say it appears, I'm just correlating, if the landing gears are not retracting, which they should have retracted immediately after the takeoff, because I want the aircraft to accelerate. So if my engines are not with me, if engines have stopped, then there's no hydraulic pressure and I can't really do it. So they correlate. So if you correlate, you think that engines failed. Now failing of both the engines together is another rarest or rare moment in aviation history. It doesn't happen.
But something like this happening with a Dreamliner, which many are saying is uncrashable. That's the word people are using.
So that's why we are shocked. We don't want to speculate because we really are shocked. Those who have lived this life, they are shocked. It doesn't happen. So if there is no problem of protocol and procedures, we are taking off that time. In any case, there are two critical things in transport flying. One is at the time of takeoff, another is the time of landing. At the time of takeoff, the accidents have been very rare, very few, far and few. They have happened, but they are far and few, and they have never led to this kind of disaster. That you're taken off, and when you're at some height, it just goes down. So you now see you try to make out by the visuals whatever you have. So the visuals say that there's nothing that one engine, suppose there's an indigestion, a digestion of some bird or some activity, which I told you before this aircraft takes off, ATC has already taken care of that.
And sir, if you see, the takeoff is happening. That entire sequence we have for our viewers, it's a 59-second video. Takeoff is happening. There is no smoke or fire visible at that point in time.
It'll happen because the whole fuel, 1,25,000 liters of fuel is there. So that'll glow like it'll be a ball of fire, which goes up.
So
that's a different thing. That's on impact.
I don't want to speculate here, but a lot of people are talking about possibility of a human error. I mean, I don't want to jump the gun here, but given the current circumstances, what will you say to those who are raising this question?
So there are two kinds of human error we see in aviation. One is called pilot's error, human error. That's a pilot flying there, whether it's a flying pilot or non-flying pilot, captain or this thing. So that is one kind of human error. Second is engineering human error at the maintenance level when the aircraft is on ground. So there are many checks and balances. Many when I say, when you are talking about the engines, controls, flying controls, and any other part which keeps the aircraft flying, whether the elevators, air brakes, or the wings, or the tail, ailerons, etc., everything is taken care of before the aircraft is taking off. So before you say anything, we have to take a deep breath and as a nation ponder over it and go by the records which are there in your flight data recorder and in CVR.
That's 1179 as you approach cross 28 left, runway 28 right.
But what actually went wrong? What happened? Was it mechanical failure? Was it engine failure? Was it a fuel-related matter? Was it a bird hit? We will not know immediately. There have been erstwhile employees of Boeing who have raised questions in the past about the manufacturing process involved with respect to the 787 Dreamliner.
Captain Steve, you've said that it's unlikely to be an engine issue. What do you think it could be then?
Well, it could be an engine issue, but we just don't see any indications of that. You don't see any fire out of the engines. You don't see any sparks. You don't see any smoke. They look to be operating normally. And in that first initial takeoff video, you can see the dirt off the side of the runway being dusted up by the engines. They were at full power, at least when they rotated. Here's my theory on what I think happened. The airplane lost lift under power. And this is, again, a theory. But at the point where the airplane would lift off the ground, the pilot flying would say to the co-pilot, gear up. And at that point, the other pilot would reach and grab the gear handle and lift it up to bring the landing gear up into the airplane to make the airplane more aerodynamic and to get rid of all that drag. The gear, as we can see, stayed down the entire flight. It never moved. So it wasn't that they started to come up and then came back down. They never moved at all. It could be that the pilot reached and grabbed the wrong handle and grabbed the flap handle instead of the landing gear handle and raised the flaps. If you raise the flaps by mistake, that's going to cause a chain of events that you can't recover from, because all of that lift now is lost from the wing at the most critical phase of flight. You're the heaviest, the slowest, and you have all your power up. You don't have any power to spare.
Captain Steve, allow me to ask you this, and the purpose of our conversation is that people understand what could have gone wrong. Now, when you say that, this a wrong handle could have led to a chain of events that are irreversible, what does it tell you about the kind of technology? Because, we are talking about the 7878 Dreamliner, which is being billed as the most reliable, safest, uncrashable aircraft.
Correct. And I don't know that there's any technology that could make up for or correct a mistake like that if it was a mistake. Once the pilots command the flaps to come up, normally you want the flaps to come up. That's going to happen much higher altitude and a much higher airspeed. If it happened by mistake at a lower altitude and a slower airspeed, you're going to see what you saw in the video, which is an aircraft that loses lift and doesn't have the altitude to recover. He could have lowered the nose and gained some airspeed, but he was already at 200 feet. He didn't have that luxury.
But anything right now by way of trying to speak about the circumstances in which the flight crashed will be in the realm of speculation. Only a thorough investigation will give us the answers. So this was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner that actually recorded its first ever major crash of this nature. It has a reputation for safety, and there are a series of stringent checks that this particular model is subjected to before it takes off from any particular airport. So let's just take you through some of those details. Now, the ground engineers, of course, look at the servicing, the fueling and the hydraulic checks. They undertake a series of other stringent measures to ensure that the tire and brake inspections are also held properly. This is all, of course, before takeoff. Subsequently, there are in-flight checks like powering up aircraft systems and also configuring and testing controls as well as instruments. This is undertaken by the crew on board as well. This also involves checking as to whether or not landing gear, the levers of the landing gear are actually down and the flap and spoiler levels are also in the right position. So that, of course, is another check that the aircraft is subjected to before it takes off. And one particular pilot, in this case, of course, a co-pilot, Mr. Clive Sundar, and also Captain Sumit Sabharwal, who was the chief pilot of this particular aircraft. Cumulatively, of course, between them, they had more than 10,000 hours of flying experience. So one particular pilot does an external walk-around of the aircraft to inspect it, and then he inspects everything from the tires to the doors to the fuselage as well as the wings. And it's only after all these checks have actually concluded that the flight is readied for takeoff. So presumably all this was done before AI-171 eventually took off. So what actually went wrong is the question that many are asking, if it had been given the all clear to take off from Ahmedabad on its way to Gatwick Airport. Also, what of the rest of Air India's Boeing fleet, or the Boeing fleet that are part of other airlines in India and elsewhere?
If there are indeed mechanical issues that either Boeing or the airline can identify at the earliest, is there a need, or would there be potentially a need to ground aircraft? Of course, we have seen in the case of the 737 MAX that the fleet was grounded for a considerable period of time globally. What's the possibility or the procedure if that is to indeed happen in the case of this aircraft as well?
Yeah, well, you correctly tell your viewers about the 737 grounding. It didn't happen after the first loss of life. It took the second loss of life to occur. I think Boeing would be more cautious here if evidence emerged from the black boxes that there was a serious airworthiness issue related to the Boeing aircraft. And don't forget, it's got American-made engines. They're General Electric Gen X engines. So I cannot emphasize enough how important the evidence from the black box data will be. And one would hope that the Indian safety authorities will be telling us within the next 48 hours that they've located the black boxes. And then usually it takes another 7 days to download that data.
Right. We've seen the New York Times also come out and report that the FAA said last year that it was investigating claims by a Boeing engineer who said that sections of the fuselage of the 787 Dreamliner were improperly fastened together and could break apart mid-flight after thousands of trips. Of course, entirely speculative once again, but the very fact that someone from Boeing has chosen to raise this issue, how much of an issue could that be in this event, or how much of a role could have played in this particular plane crash?
Okay. Yeah, again, an interesting point that you raise. The video evidence that I've seen and you've seen and your viewers have seen, that aircraft was in one piece when it was unable to gain altitude. And what you see is that aircraft gently descending into the building. There was no in-flight breakup. And so I don't think that the issues in relation to fatigue of the fuselage are relevant at the moment. Well, obviously I could be wrong, but just looking at the clear digital evidence, that aircraft was in one piece. The wings were not generating enough lift, and one of the reasons for that is that the engines weren't producing enough power for whatever reason. But I don't think that that is related to issues with the aircraft fuselage or fatigue.
The families of those who died have been scarred for life, but they're demanding answers, and so are many others who are completely crestfallen and absolutely shell-shocked about the tragedy that has unfolded.